and participate in 100-mile runs across the country. So this is kind of a big holiday for the ultra running world. In Auburn, California, there's a big 100-mile race happening on Saturday. And the Western States 100 is one of the oldest 100-mile races in the country. And so we're kind of keeping an eye on that. Definitely something I enjoy being able to do. Give you a little bit more about my story and kind of my background and how Pride in Agriculture came to be. I mentioned I grew up on my family's ranch in Arkansas. We raised cattle. It was a large operation, but I knew that when I left high school that I wanted to experience different parts of agriculture, different parts of our industry, because every farmer or rancher does things differently. And so I took off from my family's ranch in Arkansas, went to school at Oklahoma State and University of Tennessee, studying animal science, nutrition, reproduction, and really tried to dive in to get an opportunity to explore the industry. I worked in some of the largest cattle feed yards in the country in the Texas Panhandle, and then wound up moving to the Rocky Mountain region for over a decade, working on different farms and ranches, commodity products to niche marketing programs, producing beef for natural beef programs, and then wound up in the association space. So I worked for the Cattlemen's Organization of Montana, working on policy and communications there. And then actually Darren Williams, who's one of our guests today, and recruited me to come to the national organization. I'm working on advocacy efforts. And a lot of my efforts were focused on consumer advocacy, helping consumers to learn more about our food supply and where that food comes from, and connecting them with farmers and ranchers from across the country. And so I've really tried to get an opportunity to explore diverse perspectives throughout the industry. And so throughout this time, I was really involved in advocacy efforts. So in 2008, I was kind of what you might refer to as the OG or the pioneers in farming and ranching, and adapting to social media as a way to reach larger audiences, to carry our message out there and share what I was doing on farms and ranches every day. So we'd get on Twitter, share some of our messages and information. And when Instagram came around, was doing some of that. I also at the time started blogging, using blogging as a platform for longer form storytelling, being able to explain topics and dive a little bit deeper, and eventually dove into storytelling and trying to share and bring forward different perspectives from the agriculture industry, and helping consumers to learn more about the diverse farmers that are out in our industry, and being able to share those different perspectives. And so I'd share stories from across the country. And something that really resonated with a lot of people was the term agriculture proud. Why are we proud to be a part of the industry? Why are we proud of what we do? And that grew beyond what I ever imagined, of being able to reach new audiences, reach new people, and really help to share that message. It was a message of, hey, we're proud of the industry we're in, we're proud of the communities that we're in, and being able to share that message was pretty cool. I've been able to travel across the country, work with farmers and ranchers of different methods, different production styles, and helping them to reach consumers with the messages of what they do. I was pretty proud of those opportunities and those who helped me to get there and being able to share those stories. We fast forward to 2020. We all know that lots of things happened in our culture at that time. We've got COVID, reacting to that and trying to figure out how we navigate those waters. We also had a lot of conversations about cultural diversity that came to the forefront, racial tensions that came up. And we saw a lot of these discussions happening. There was a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, or a lot of unknowns as part of that. And these impacted the agriculture community as well. And so a lot of questions came up of like, is diversity and inclusion a conversation for agriculture? Is it a conversation that we should be involved in as part of that? And specifically, when you look at events around racial tensions and the conversations that were happening there, farmers and ranchers, in some parts of the country did not respond well. And looking back, seemingly they felt like it didn't impact them. It didn't impact their communities, and they didn't see these experiences the same way that maybe consumers did in more urban parts of the country. And the responses were downright, bigoted and hateful and discriminatory towards other people. I've got a couple of examples here of how farmers and ranchers were reacting to racial tensions and protests that were happening in more urban parts of the country, things that, they didn't understand because they did not experience them. And so this made me take a moment to sit back and think about and consider how I was using my advocacy platform, my voice, to talk about diversity in our industry. And not only reaching consumers and trying to tell diverse stories of farmers, but within our community, how are we addressing diversity? And how are we being inclusive of the people that are around us? And how are our words and our actions impacting those people that may not be perceived as the norm in our communities? And it took me a little bit to sit back and think about and consider how could I use my platform for that. And that's where Pride in Agriculture was born. Pride in Agriculture, I've been asked, well, who's involved in the organization? What's your structure and what are your resources there? I'm like, hi, it's me. I'm the organization, right? I chose to use my platform for advocacy, my voice, um, to make a difference. How could I make an impact? And for me, in expressing, I don't want to speak for other people. I don't want to speak for other people's experiences. I need to speak from my experiences and my aspect of diversity, because I had not been very visible. I had not been very vocal about being a gay man in agriculture. And I'd heard a lot of discriminatory comments and derogatory comments from those around me throughout the industry, and I was afraid of how their reaction would be to learning more about me and my story. And so in June of 2022, I decided, okay, I need to share these stories. I need to share these perspectives. And we need to help people understand that there are LGBTQ plus people in agriculture, in our rural communities, who are leaders in our industry, who are making positive impacts. We're farmers and ranchers and members of the industry, just like you. And so throughout the month, I brought stories of 17 different individuals forward through social media platforms, digital platforms, and brought their stories forward. LGBTQ plus people, allies, and being able to bring some of those stories forward. And during that month, hundreds of thousands of people saw these stories, heard these stories, and sparked conversations across the industry, across different channels, different platforms, in different areas of the country. And what can we do to improve visibility, improve awareness, and be able to advance these conversations so that we can create more inclusive environments in our industry and in our communities today. But this isn't just my story. It's stories of individuals from across our industry and across our communities. And so I want to turn it over to a couple of people that have joined us here today that have been part of this journey of improving awareness and visibility of LGBTQ plus people in our industry as well. So first, I've got Darren Williams. He lives up in the Modesto area. He's a strong ally. He's an advocate, and he's been a mentor of mine. In fact, we were just recognizing him last week in Cincinnati at a meeting for his induction to the Agricultural Public Relations Hall of Fame for his work in public relations in the industry. But more importantly, in the story, today, he's a strong ally as part of that. So I featured Darren's story as part of Pride in Agriculture. And Darren, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and if you will, kind of describe a little bit about what this work means to you as an ally.
Thanks, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. As Ryan mentioned earlier, he and I were involved in traveling around the country and working with farmers and ranchers to be advocates for agriculture, to tell their own stories and share their own stories with consumers via social media and other forms. And in the process of doing this, I, like Ryan, I think was involved in a lot of meetings or social events where I might have sat idly by while I heard ugly comments about whether it's either related to race or to LGBTQ community, and I'm sort of ashamed to say, just didn't speak up. Was probably afraid to speak up in that environment and put my voice out there. But it really was in 2015 for me when marriage was legalized for all people, extended to everyone, that I decided I needed to speak up, because I started to see this ugliness appearing in comments in social media, public comments. And one of my concerns was, what kind of image does that portray for agriculture? That's not the image we want to portray to consumers, is, that we're exclusive, community of people who don't welcome everyone into our communities. And I just don't believe that's true. I honestly believe that that's a very small part of the rural community, but I think it gets amplified and seems bigger because the rural community is a small community to begin with. And, we all hear the statistics. The farmers and ranchers are less than 2% of the population now, and I just don't think we can afford to be exclusive. I think we have to be welcoming and inclusive of all viewpoints, of all lifestyles, of all people of all races and religions and sexual orientation. And I have a daughter who's gay, and so it hits home very personally for me, and particularly the issue of gay marriage. When it seemed to me that people were saying that my daughter doesn't have the same right to have a lifelong committed relationship to their spouse, like me and my lovely wife Leslie, who's in that picture there, have, and particularly that somebody would want to deprive my daughter of that. And I said, it's too. I've sat on the sidelines for far too long, and I've got to speak up. And my wife and I my wife actually signed up to go down to Modesto Pride and signed up for free mom hugs. And so I went with her, and I figured we can do dad hugs too. And I'm probably going to get emotional when I talk about this, but I'm standing there, and I've got young people coming up to me and saying, "Do you know how long it's been since I've had a hug from my father?" And and would just grab onto me and just not want to let go. I mean, just sobbing in tears. And I thought, how have we rejected our own loved ones, our own kids? How can we let that happen? And so I've just committed everything I can do as an advocate to take this issue on and support people like Ryan and all of the just everyone who all of the wonderful people that I've met and colleagues and friends throughout the years. As a white cisgender 60-year-old male, I think I have a unique opportunity to speak from within. So Ryan, I'll just leave it at that and turn it back to you.
Thanks, Darren. Appreciate that. Definitely, I think candid and honest conversation as part of that, and being able to share your experiences as an ally. Got Cody here. I think he's on the farm and in a tractor. If you saw him turn on his camera briefly, it looks like he had to run off, and as farm things do, call duty calls and having to take care of things. I'll share a little bit of Cody's story. Cody and his husband Thomas live up in Ferndale in Northern California. They have a dairy farm with their family and their son as well. And then they have just ventured out, as you see in the story here, or the photo here with Cody, an ice cream shop using the milk from their farm and really building community around everyone that's around them and sharing their story. And I think while I've not featured Cody and Thomas yet as part of the Pride in Agricultural effort, I bring them forward as an example of members of the LGBTQ plus community who are farmers, who are involved in production agriculture, involved in our communities, and working alongside every other farmer that's out there and being able to do stories. And I think Cody and Thomas do an awesome job of bringing their story forward to what their family looks like and how they're involved in the community, and really bringing visibility to this space and showing, I think, being leaders and showcasing how we can create more inclusive spaces for everyone there. So if Cody's able to jump back on here in a little bit, we'll definitely invite him to share his personal story as well. And Darren, thank you for doing that. I know that you are squeezing this in between meetings today, so appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences as well. So as I was sharing that, I think Pride in Agriculture is definitely, I think it's a community effort. As part of, everyone's stories that I'm trying to bring forward. It's not just me, but I think I want to bring individuals forward. I want to bring examples forward of how we're leaders in the industry, how we're creating more inclusive spaces as part of that. And as I've done this, I've realized that a lot of people don't recognize that there are LGBTQ plus people around them in agriculture or rural communities. Partly because it's not always, that aspect of diversity is not always visible, such as your skin color or other aspects, disabilities that may be more visible in part of our communities. And so people don't often recognize or acknowledge, maybe what are some of the challenges that LGBTQ plus people encounter? What do we face as part of our industry? And just today, actually, I had a different slide in here, and I swapped it out about an hour ago. University of Illinois just released a new research study looking at the challenges that LGBTQ farmers face in our industry. Some of those struggles, and one of those big struggles is mental health. I hear a lot from detractors, from critics that, well, you're gay because you have mental health problems. That's not the case, right? I mean, those are the comments that I receive on a regular basis. But oftentimes it's because of the criticisms, because of the marginalization that we experience in our communities, that it results in mental health problems, and those often go unseen. Mental health is one thing that isn't as visible across our entire communities. And so it's one of those aspects, one of those challenges that we face as part of that. Also, in being LGBTQ plus people, that fear sometimes of being visible in that can result in a lot of other challenges as well. I've got a couple of articles at prideandag.com/resources that share a couple of these different challenges that we have, that we encounter. And part of that is, with that lack of visibility, maybe we don't have access to resources, healthcare resources, mental health resources that other people may be able to have. And a lot of these are shared with other minorities or underrepresented groups in our communities, these same things that we face and we challenge. So I encourage you to go to the resources page as part of that. I'll share that link later on that you can explore a little bit more of that. And I've got an article that explores this new research that it was just shared today, diving in a little bit deeper to that. Just a quick reminder, if you've got any questions, if you'd love for me to dive into a little bit deeper to any of these topics, please do use the chat. Definitely appreciate any involvement, any questions that you may have as part of that. Happy to answer any of those. So the question comes, how do we work toward greater inclusion of diverse people in our communities? How do we work toward inclusion as part of that? I think pride in agriculture right now today is one of the big needs that I see in our industry is visibility and awareness. It's hard to work toward solutions if the problems or the challenges aren't visible. And I think we're really trying to work on sharing stories, sharing perspectives that other people can relate to work towards that visibility and awareness. But what could inclusion look like? When we're talking about LGBTQ plus issues and conversations, beyond Pride Month, we're wrapping up Pride Month here. What do the other 11 months of the year look like? And then it's hard because we can talk about diversity all we want, but when it comes to inclusions, that takes action, right? And how do we do that? And I think I've got a couple of examples in the allies section of my website of people who are taking actions and bringing those things to life and doing the work. One of those things that I want to bring forward is Beef Farmers of Ontario. Look north to Canada and some of our neighbors up there in the farming industry. And I think I've got a group here that's done a really good job navigating the waters of diversity and exploring, are they inclusive of everyone in their community, and how can they be better at being able to do that? So a couple of questions from their story. It's a two-part story, a couple thousand words that I summarized our conversation in, but I've got a couple of highlights here from the Bee Farmer's story. One of the big questions that they had to ask is, hey, we can't manage what we don't measure. That's one of the big challenges that they had out there. How are they measuring diversity in their communities, in their industry, to be able to ask the question, are we being inclusive? And they had to recognize, they had to acknowledge as they got their board members on board who were farmers and ranchers throughout their communities, that these conversations are uncomfortable. And they're going to have to expose themselves to different perspectives, different ideas, in order to make progress and be more inclusive of everyone that's in their communities. And they had to recognize that there will be times when they're going to mess up. Myself, it's nerve-wracking anytime I hit publish on a story or a new piece of content because I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong. And there have been times where I've messed up. I've had to apologize and I've had to make things right because maybe I said something that wasn't right, or I shared a perspective from someone who wasn't ready to be that visible in their aspects of diversity. But I think knowing and acknowledging those things is really important. So looking at Beef Farmers of Ontario's story, here's a short link if you want to go directly to their story. They got together all of their board members who are farmers and representatives of the agricultural industry across their province. And they asked those questions. They asked, how can we bring in different perspectives to learn more about diverse communities across the industry? And what can they do about this? This was, to give you a timeline, it was the summer of 2020. So there were diversity conversations happening across our culture. And being able to explore some of these. And I know there's a small print on there, but if you go directly to the story, you can find all of these links and being able to dive in there. But they laid out their commitments. What is this journey going to look like for them so that they weren't just identifying diversity, but how are they doing the work to be more inclusive? And this is a couple of take-homes from their example on the work that they were doing. They had to make the commitment to listening to different perspectives. So it isn't just jump out the gate and take action, but really, focus on listening to others and learning about other perspectives and discovering those that they aren't familiar with. They had to take time on education on the issues. I think the work that you're doing here of hosting a webinar like this, becoming more educated on the issues that are being faced by community members and across our industry, I think was a really important step in being able to do that. Taking time to collaborate, bringing in people who represent different aspects of diversity, making sure that their voices are at the table to collaborate with different organizations, different people and trying to figure out solutions. And then also evolving, recognizing that they needed to evolve as they learn more, as they collaborate with different perspectives, recognize that, you've got to evolve your commitments and be flexible and be amenable to that. And two more things. I think one of the big things that Beef Farmers of Ontario learned that I think is really applicable to all of these conversations in this work is understanding how policies impact others. This is something that can be really hard for those of us in organizations and in government work and working with larger groups is, understanding how our policies impact others. And that's key before we make changes so that we can make sure we're making the right adjustments to be able to serve everyone around us. And then finally, I think Beef Farmers of Ontario was really brave in committing to this is in recognizing and acknowledging, asking before they take actions to ensure that their actions were not self-serving. They weren't just making the statements and releasing the statements on some of these things, but making sure that the actions and the changes that they were taking were in the interest of those that they were trying to serve and better represent across their communities as well. This is just one example that I have with Pride in Agriculture, and this is examples of the work that I'm trying to bring visibility to, that I'm trying to bring forward in our industry to show how we can make more inclusive spaces for everyone that is around us. So Pride in Agriculture is not a big organization. It's definitely a grassroots effort as that part of this, but I definitely thank you for bringing me on and asking, hey, what is going on? What are we doing? And I think if we leave here today, I think one of the big keys to this I'm learning as I'm sharing these stories and through 15 years of advocacy work across the agricultural industry, I've learned that communication is a two-way street. And one of the most important things we can do is take time to listen before we take action, before we take steps, is make sure that we've got space or making the space to listen and for other perspectives and other voices to be heard. So I would definitely want to open it up for any questions that you may have, any other experiences that you want to learn more about. But I encourage you to reach out, to connect with me. If you've got any questions, explore prideandagriculture.com and some of the stories and examples that are there. And I recognize that I don't have the most diverse group of people represented, right? I'll be the first to admit, primarily who I've featured in the first couple of years are white gay men. And so I've done that intentionally of trying to connect with my audience. I know my core audience in agriculture are most going to relate to people that look like them. And that's been the first step in starting these conversations. I think that's been able to open doors with people who would have been very resistant to these conversations at first. And so one of my goals over the next couple of years is increase that diversity that's represented in the stories that I'm sharing. I've earned permission to have these tough conversations where people disagree. And now is the point where you'll start to see me pivot and bringing other aspects of diversity, other types of voices to this conversation to really grow these efforts. And I've learned that it takes time. It's a long effort. But we can make change and we can make progress with those. And to kind of give you an idea what does Pride in Agriculture want to do? What is it? What's going on? I recognize and I've looked at there are other organizations that are serving the agricultural industry on LGBTQ plus issues and topics. In the corporate space, there's a lot of employee resource groups, a lot of business resource groups that are out there for employees that that want to be active in this space. But those don't exist at the grassroots level. Those don't exist for small business owners or farmers or ranchers or individuals out in our rural communities. And that's really where I really want to work in Pride in Agriculture, is help to serve those individuals, help to serve farmers and ranchers in the field, like some of those that I'm featuring on the stories on my site, and being able to help them have access to these resources, help our rural communities have access to the tools and the resources that they need to have these conversations and explore what more inclusive environments look like for them. So with that, I would love any questions that anyone may have using the chat or any other form here to help you learn a little bit more about what we can do to support LGBTQ people in agriculture and in industry today. So, is it Rima?
Arma, yeah, it's a weird one.
Okay.
If you got it right, you'd be the first one. I was just wondering, and I was quick with the hand. I didn't mean to kind of jump in, but
you're good.
Two questions. First, where did we get one of your very snazzy stickers? Because they're very cool.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I did a soft launch of some stickers. It takes money to host some of these things. And so I'm looking at ways, okay, how do we improve visibility? Stickers are one of those ways, it's a conversation starter. So I've turned the Pride in Agriculture logo into a sticker, kind of did a soft launch of those, and those sold out. Like, did not even imagine that they would be gone. Yeah. So I've reordered them. They'll be here next week. If you go to the shops on the Instagram account, that's the easiest way to get a hold of some of those. So just go to the Instagram Pride in Agricultural Instagram account, and those will be listed there. More to come. It's a new venture, but kind of stepping my toe in there, and I'm glad I took it slow, because they have definitely been a useful tool, and people wanting to use those to improve visibility.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm glad you said conversation starter, because I think that kind of leads to my second question, which is, working for the state government, right? We're in Sacramento, and there does seem to be a pretty big rural-urban divide in a lot of places, but certainly in California. And so sometimes it can be hard when you are kind of, as was mentioned earlier, in the room with those conversations, and you hear some folks, maybe espousing views that you don't necessarily believe in, or that align with our values as CDFA. How do you start that conversation without getting folks on the back foot, particularly understanding, where we come from, maybe we don't have a lot of credibility when we're in those rooms all the time?
Yeah, I think this is a rough space to navigate, because every single conversation is a little different. One of the first things I'll say is keep your safety in mind when you approach a conversation, especially if you're a member of the LGBTQ plus community. Like, keep your safety in mind. Not every situation is a safe place for your physical safety to address people who may disagree with you today. And I think that's important to remember. So oftentimes it's easier for allies to step up and say something when they see something. And so that's where a lot of work that I've done over this Pride Month, instead of bringing more voices forward from the queer and LGBTQ plus community, I've chosen to have a focus on allyship, because I think our political climate today, it's a little safer bet. That's a little safer for the mental health of the community that I'm trying to represent and to bring forward, because allies, you can step up and say something when they see something. And I think that that's one of the really key things, is when we hear something, and I think that's kind of what's gotten us to where we're at, is by not saying anything. We've got to find the courage to step up and say something, when we see it, when we hear those derogatory remarks. Because if we don't, who's going to call attention to that? Who's going to say, hey, that's not okay? That negatively impacts other people around us. I referenced a little bit of like, I had to earn permission to have this conversation. So one of the things that I've learned, not just in this advocacy work, but my 15 years of focusing on this in agriculture, I tried to bring some of these lessons forward, and you'll see that of how I framed the stories for Pride in Agriculture, that I think is different in how others have approached LGBTQ plus and diversity conversations in our industry, is that you have to start with what you have in common. So if I start and like where we disagree, we're going to butt heads and we're not going to agree. And usually not going to be, neither party will be open to conversation, or it won't be productive, right? We'll just walk away saying, well, I got to disagree. So you'll see that as I brought these perspectives and these stories forward, everyone that's telling an individual story, I start with, how are you involved in agriculture? Why are you proud to be a part of the agriculture community? Building on that route that I started in advocacy stories 15 years ago. And when I do that, I've had so much better conversations. So start with what you have in mind, in common. Start with what you agree on, and maybe it's hard, but the conversation today probably won't be about the topic where we want to move the needle on, right? It takes a little bit of time, and that's hard. Patience is hard. But I wanted to, I think it's good to start there, to recognize that's a way to break, open doors to conversations where people can disagree. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Julie, is there any work or presentations being done at colleges and universities with ag programs who have students, professors that may have connections at the grassroots level? Yes, actually. So if you look at a couple of the stories that I've featured in the last couple of weeks, a lot of those are from ag education, and the ag education kind of level at the universities involved in a lot of that research. So there's some names there and some links there to resources that I found that there are several universities out there that are doing work. I know in the headlines in the last couple of months, there's been stories and headlines about universities or institutions pulling back money that supported diversity programs. But there's a lot of research happening out there where we keep moving forward. And one of those is agricultural education programs. So NAE, National Association of Ag Educators, is one organization where there's a lot of good conversations happening place and where some good resources are. But take a look. I've shared some of those in this past month and actually have some coming up over the next couple of months that I think that this speaks to that and how we can find allies there and working in that space.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Steph asked, do we have an example of connecting with someone in agricultural who does not have the same beliefs, and how that conversation turned out? Oh, if you'd see the comments that I hide on a regular basis. And I laugh because that's all I can do. Right. And I think it's something that dealing with negativity, dealing with people who disagree is something that I've had to learn over 15 years of this. It has been, back in 2010, it was vegan activists that were attacking me for my views on beef and dairy and raising livestock. And I learned a lot of lessons when I started writing for CNN, and I wrote for CNN for 3 years, a very liberal audience, a different audience than what I was used to in agriculture circles. My stories ended up on the front page of their international website. And that opened me up to a lot of criticism as I was talking about how farmers work, how we raise livestock, and what we do, and controversial topics like GMOs and antibiotics that we use in livestock. And so as I got involved in those conversations, one of the key things that I learned when you're dealing with someone who doesn't agree with you, in addition to leading with what you have in common, learn and recognize that the internet's a wild west, right? And everybody, especially today in 2024 and beyond, we feel empowered to say whatever we want to without repercussions online, referred to as keyboard warriors. And so you have to keep that in mind. People who get on and criticize you online, are doing so because they can. And you're often not going to change their mind. If I receive a derogatory comment or a direct message, my response to them in that time, in that space, is not going to change their mind on the topic. I'm not going to change their position. And so when it comes to a direct message, I'm not afraid to block somebody. If they're attacking me as a person, I'm not afraid to use that block feature, because if they're attacking me and not addressing the topic at hand, there's nowhere at that moment for that conversation to go forward. And that's a line that I've drawn. People say, well, that if you block them, that's not the most productive way to do that. And I'm like, yeah, but I have to be aware of my mental health too. So when it comes to a public comment, the way that I address this, and when someone tries to engage me in a conversation where they disagree, what I've learned is that if you respond to the critic with those who are observing in mind, then you're much more likely to be successful in reaching those who where you might make a difference. So trying to rephrase that. So when I get a critical comment, I don't respond to the critic. I reply to their comment, but I respond for the benefit of everyone else watching. Because for every critic out there, there's hundreds of people out there watching how you respond. And that speaks more to you and your efforts and your values than it does the critic. And that can often speak louder. So, maybe reply to that critic in an open forum, but reply once, recognize you're not going to change their mind, but you're responding for the benefit of everyone else watching. And that's where progress can be made. I've done that, and so many times I do that, and people send me a direct message privately and said, hey, Ryan, I saw your response to that very critical or that very negative comment. I appreciate that, and often ends up in engaging in a further conversation. So those are two key tips of like leading with what you have in common, and then responding, for the benefit of everyone else watching instead of the critic. And I think that's really important. So that was a long response to your answer, but hopefully a good example. So. All right. Any other questions? And yes, Steph, I would love to. I've been to Auburn and run on the Western States Trail a couple of times. Love the Sacramento area and that part of the state. We'll be out there for Western States this week. So if you're in the running space, definitely watch the Western States Endurance Run this weekend. So. Anyone else? Any other questions? All right. Well, I always try to leave a little bit of space and time for any other questions. So I'll throw back up my contact information if you've got that. I encourage you to go to prideandagriculture.com, explore the people that the stories of the people who've been willing to share them, some of these experiences, and those resources will continue to grow. And like I mentioned, that's my goal, is kind of for that to be a resource in a space where people can learn and grow and try to figure out how can we bring these conversations to farmers and ranchers and our grassroots level to create more inclusive spaces in agriculture and the industry. And I thank your organization. I thank the Department of Food and Ag today for creating the space for this conversation and learning for everyone who's online. So thank you all very much for doing that.
Thanks for being here, Ryan. We really appreciate it. And thank you for all the work that you're doing in this space. It means a lot to folks like us who work in agriculture, and a lot of us here are members of the community. And so it really does fill our hearts with joy to see folks doing this kind of work. So, well, with that, we will go ahead and end this Lunch and Learn. Thank everybody for being here today. It's been great to see you all. Keep an eye out as we wind up, as we're winding down LGBTQ plus Pride Month. We are now moving into Disability Pride Month. And so we're going to have a whole new round of lunch and learns and events for everybody. So we hope to see you all there. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your week.